Henry Ford wanted to build the Model T in larger and larger numbers because he'd seen that by building more and more of the same thing, he could cut the price. He and his companions went to Chicago one day, and they went to a meat processing factory where they were slaughtering pigs. And they were doing this by hanging the pigs on a moving conveyor. And Henry was impressed by this. He said, why don't we adapt this for producing cars? And they tried dragging a car through the factory and building it up as it went so that each worker had one allotted task. And in 1913, they installed the world's first moving production line in their Detroit factory for building motor cars. And from then on, the Model T poured out of the factory by the thousand. And by the early 20s, he was building 2 million a year.
I got involved with Model Ts at the ripe old age of 15 when my cousin was working then for a local Ford dealer. He'd been out demonstrating a 57 Prefect to an old farmer, and he happened to mention during the test drive that parts of his previous purchase from that firm were still in the farm loft. We returned a few days later with sufficient equipment, thinking we'd want to find a complete car. Sadly, there was only the body in the chicken loft and a few other parts left lying about that the scrapman couldn't move. We were given them. In those days, that was the going rate. Back in the 60s, Ts were not really valuable. Well, the Model T must have been Henry's big one. He called it his masterpiece. It was the greatest seller and it put Ford on the map worldwide. Everybody knew Henry Ford and his product.
I suppose the most graphic description of Henry Ford that anybody ever made was to call him genius ignoramus. He was a Michigan farmer's son with all the narrowness of view that that implied, but he had a breadth of vision that was quite remarkable. Here was a man who, if he turned up at Ford Motor Company nowadays and was asked to sit a simple written examination, would be thrown out and not given a job because he couldn't even spell the word model in Model T. But despite all that, became a billionaire, the first billionaire of the motor industry, and who gave the world transportation on a scale that he had never seen before.
In May 1927, the 15 millionth Model T came out of the plant. And the assembly line closed down forever on the world's most famous car.
In October 1931, Henry Ford said to his designers, "Create me a small car for Europe." By February 1932, they had running prototypes on display at motor shows in Europe. It was done that quickly. The Model Y, which was the result, was a brilliant piece of styling, and it gave Ford instant market success.
The peculiarities about the Model Y really are its braking and steering, which are both fairly dodgy. Steering is very wandery. It tends to wander about on the road, particularly once you get above about 30 miles an hour, and that's made worse by the skinny tyres. Braking, it has rod-operated brakes, not hydraulic brakes like on more modern cars. And there are 4 different length steel rods connected to the brakes, and consequently the brakes will actually come on at different times. So you lock one wheel and then another one. So in the wet, it's particularly hairy. I find it fascinating to realise that people like a family of 4 would load the car up and maybe go from London to the Midlands for a week's holiday in it. And it's quite an impressive feat really in a car like this.
Other makers like Morris and Singer brought out rival cars with similar styling and more modern mechanical features. Ford was in a corner because it's now looked expensive against these rivals. So in 1935, they cut the price dramatically. They cut the dealer's margins to nearly nothing. They cut their own profit margin to about £5 a car. They brought out a car at £100. Nobody could match it. It's the only £100 saloon car there has ever been. It was a marvellous success, and it gave back Ford the market share it was losing.
This is the Ford Popular 103E, built from 53 to 59, and although 20 years down the road, it followed on from the Model Y, and not a lot else really changed. Still has its cable brakes, still has its funny way of wandering about the road, and in the wet they can be quite fun, you know.
Braking must be smooth, like this. Did you notice the driver's hands up? Watch again.
Another characteristic of these cars is they have a vacuum wiper system. That runs off the engine. The air from the engine runs the wipers. The more you use the engine, the less the wipers get. So in theory, you're going up a hill, you're trying to use your engine, it's pouring down a rain, and your wipers stop. You have to let your foot off, let your wipers clear your screen, and away you go again. A lot of people behind you moan a little bit, but we get that.
When you get into your Ford, whether it be the Popular, the Deluxe, or the V8, and drive up hills, over bad surfaces, round acute bends, or wherever else the whim takes you, the easy and trouble-free run is just accepted, because you know your Ford will never let you down.
The thing I really love about these cars is they've got a character. They've got a lovely little shape to them. It's just fun to drive. I found this one on a hedge in Down Market, Norfolk. Rebuilt it myself, and I love it. It's a passion.
The next advantage is on hills. The Popular is climbing Fingalbridge Bridle Path, which is normally only used by cars in special trials. Gear trouble on this hill would be trouble indeed, but the Popular takes the bends and surface like a young thoroughbred.
Ford in the 50s made a major change of direction. They opened their own engineering centre. This was actually in Birmingham, and they developed a new small car there, which was a modern small car, the first modern small car they'd actually had since the 1930s. It came out in 1959 and it caused a sensation.